Thank you very much for a very warm welcome and invitation. I find visits to Belfast and Northern Ireland very inspiring because there is so much to share and there is so much to learn from each other's experiences. And I was here before signing of Good Friday Agreement, and then in the moment when it was signed, it happened so that I was in London and I couldn't share the atmosphere just here, but part of it was felt also in London, and it was a big day for everyone, I think, not just for people living in this country, but in many other places which still try to find ways to cope with the conflicts. And I would like to tell you a bit about the work which we do as Documenta. We are a human rights organization trying to preserve documentation collected by ourselves, by other organizations, and the very valuable part, or let's put it that maybe at the heart of our collection, are stories of people who remember 20th century. We do not record only memories of 90s. We record memories on violence in 20th century, which was for us, even in certain sense, more violent than for many other countries experiencing First World War, then political violence during First Yugoslavia, then Second World War with Holocaust and genocides, then political violence during Socialist Yugoslavia, and finally wars of 90s. So when we discussed about establishing Documenta, and I'm personally involved in civil organizing since '85, we felt that it's important to record the memories which would go long way back, because the consequences, trauma, violence, the open wounds are still there, not just related to the 90s, which you have been looking through TV screens, but they go far, far back. And we decided that we'll try to cover as much as possible. And it is that in looking at overall purpose of dealing with the past, we actually wanted to challenge persistent questioning of violence from different periods. And we eventually have to deal with relativization of violence committed in Second World War, Socialist Yugoslavia, and the 90s. And as human rights organization, try to find the ways how to challenge this relativization, because the main purpose for us is really to distance our societies from violence. We really believe that there are political ways, that there are social ways to discuss about what happened to us, to clearly distance ourselves from violence. So it's that in order to examine the reasons of divided collective memory in Croatia and in other post-Yugoslav countries, but also in a context of European dealing with the past, we actually committed ourselves first to documenting factography. We try to record whatever we can about fate of killed and missing in Croatia. And today's particular day for us, we remember fall of Vukovar. It is on that very day that in '91, actually 23 years ago, the massacres have started related to the fall of Vukovar, and in Croatia everywhere today there are commemorations. So it's that the first thing which we do is documenting human losses. This autumn we'll start publishing our data on human losses, on fate of every killed and missing person. And I would say that the reason why Documenta was established was very much related to the fact that scientific and governmental institutions have not been ready to document fate of every killed and missing person in the 90s. There was this selective look at what happened. So it's that some would be taken in consideration and would be named in evidence and some not. In the meantime, we do have a common evidence published by Croatian government of missing persons, but we still do not have evidence of all killed. It was still not published, and we hope that this act of Documenta publishing stage-by-stage documentation as we analyze it in the coming years will contribute also to government to publish with us. We would very much like actually to publish together, region by region, as our researchers have been going from house to house and have spoken with witnesses and have spoken with families about what happened. But this is something what will still be unfolding. Besides that, we felt that more than factography is needed. That's why we started the effort of recording personal memories. First, we recorded only in audio with help of volunteers, mostly young volunteers, students or young graduates of history, social sciences, and we published a book related to one particular region in Croatia, and later started fundraising for much more substantial collection of video interviews, because we felt in order to have the personal views represented, and especially having the otherwise silent minority voices represented, we needed to bring memories in video form to the public. And it is that we dreamt about this collection even before Documenta was established, but it has taken a long time to fundraise for it. And fortunately, we found an understanding partner in Erasmus University and University of Twente in the Netherlands, and eventually received support of the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs to record the collection. So it's that we began recording in January 2006 with audio, and first we published Memories of War in Pakrac and Lipik, which was promoted in September 2010 in Pakrac, which was for that town being the second most destroyed town, where more than 75% of houses have been either damaged or completely destroyed. A special kind of event on which they could hear in that multinational town, not just about what happened to the warriors and members of Croatian army, which they otherwise often hear, but also what happened to their Serbian neighbors, their Italian neighbors, their Czech neighbors, which they do not often hear. And it's that we felt encouraged to start recording a big collection, and I'll show you later the web on which the interviews, the video interviews are published. We recorded professionally. The volunteers who eventually recorded audio collection have taken on and have been full-time engaged. They, meantime, became graduated historians. And I have to say that it's interesting that actually our most skilled interviewers, young interviewers, happen to be historians. So it's that speaks something of importance of knowing about the facts, about basic history before starting such interview. So it's that interviews have been based on semi-structured questionnaire. First, when we recorded audio, we focused on 90s, but what happened is that people would speak about much longer period. And we decided that in video part, we'll try to capture as much as possible, and we'll cover a period of preparation for Second World War, the First Yugoslavia, the Second World War, the Second Yugoslavia, the Socialist Yugoslavia, political violence, and then finally the wars of the 90s. And we decided to not record, although the topic was violence, in Croatian Memories collection, all protagonists, meaning that basically we used all cooperation of civil society organizations working locally, all our friends, all people who we knew. We scanned also very carefully newspapers to find out would there be some interested interlocutors who gave an interview. And it is that the putting collection together was very much about cooperating in a very extensive network of people with whom we worked on peace building for many years. I personally was involved in anti-war campaign, since 91, and we have been building on all connections of trust established during years, because it's the trust. It's very important part in recording such collection. So some people are survivors of violence. Some are simply protagonists and members of different armies during the war. Some are children who lived in the towns during the war. So it's that it's a very diversified collection, and the oldest interlocutor was born in 1916, and he remembers the 20s. He remembers the workers' movement and the Second World War as he joined partisans in 1941. So it's that. The interviews have been elaborated, transcribed, and translated in English. What you have now on the web page is a collection of more than 200 interviews. We didn't publish them all together because it's just humanly impossible. We are gradually publishing them from month to month. More is coming out. We have contacted more than 1,000 people, and we eventually would give them questionnaire before interview. So this is somehow different from methodology which some other colleagues used. We would send them that via post or phone. We informed them about consent forms which we'll ask them to sign if they accept. There are two different consents. First is related to recording, because people might choose when recorded, that they will make interview available only to researchers, so it will be kept in Documenta collection. But most people actually choose to go public, to have memories published. Their motivation is very much about having their story heard. So it's that they sign then another consent, which is basically agreement to have interview published in any kind of form. Although when we publish in a new form, we eventually check with them. So it's that which simply feel it's fair that we additionally check with them if there is a publication or any other new form to be published. All the collection, as is published on the web page Croatian Memories .org in English version, is available to others. So it's the only thing which you need is basically to mention what is the source. We had experienced misuse of our video recording before this collection was published, and we eventually managed to prevent a publishing of just one part of interview, with contacting the person who published it and saying that we'll have to take legal action if they don't take it off the inappropriate contexted web page, and they did so. So it's that we have been very afraid before publishing what the reactions will be, because it is actually a portal, a web which brings together different interlocutors who have been in different sides of wars or political deliberations. So it's that we have been afraid that it will be very difficult for them to accept that they are in the company of the others. But as we launched the collection in a conference which happens to be very similar to this one, it is that the narrators themselves have been pleased. The conference was held in Zagreb. After we had another conference in Dubrovnik and Split, where the large number of narrators decided to speak, and very vivid discussions, because part of what is said in interviews, it's so rarely discussed in the public that there is a huge need to speak about that. And if we would have money, which we don't have, we would eventually visit many other smaller towns to have similar discussions. Although we find ways how to integrate presentation of recorded interviews in some of other activities, because besides documenting human losses and recording personal memories, we also monitor all war crimes trials, and our public presentations are often devoted to feedback to Croatian public and judiciary how these proceedings are going. So it's that I would like to mention that complementary collections, digital collections, which we have, it's documentation on war crimes, trials and reparations, in which we have 298 cases going back last 10, some even last 20 years. And they're published, meaning that there is information on indictment, on all the trial proceedings, because the trial proceedings cannot be recorded in a court of law in Croatia, so that's a limitation. What can be published is eventual report of lawyers who monitor, and what can be published are our reports. So this is the source where people can find also the first level sentence and the final sentence when Supreme Court eventually says their last word, in some cases being Constitutional Court also. The other thing which is available is documentation of human rights organizations. We find that it's very important also to document experiences of resistance, resisting violence, of opposing violence, promoting non-violence, and in particular it's extensive documentation of anti-war campaign Croatia, and now we are preparing for publishing documentation of Center for Peace, Nonviolence and Human Rights and Civic Committee for Human Rights in Osijek. The other things, the other programs which we work on, which actually use Croatian Memories Collection, it's an educational program, My Place Through Time, which is aimed at elementary and secondary schools. We work in not so many schools. I don't want to give you wrong impression. It was last year free schools and this year free schools. So it's that we are still developing the right path, how to use it, and are starting a group in cooperation with teachers to develop didactic materials because interviews which we publish are rather long. They might be more than 1 hour long, and it's very difficult for teachers to pick. So that we are developing in cooperation with them the inserts combined with material prepared for the class so that they can use it more often, and we hope that we might develop something in that direction also on the regional level, but no success in finding money for that so far. We also discussed it with Boro that it would be very nice to have it in a context of human rights education, if that one is in the schools, which is not in all post-Yugoslav countries, and history education and civic education. But these are more dreams than reality. We use it in sharing experiences with museums. We cooperate closely with institutions in Germany, in particular topography of terror and institutions managing memorials in concentration camps. And museums at Croatia, as we are very supportive, I would say we use attitude of critical support to legal institutions, because war crimes trials are something which is perceived in our country and other post-Yugoslav countries as the most important mechanism of dealing with the past. We also try to be very supportive of museums, because they are the ones who will bring back a story about what happened, and try to work in close cooperation with them. But when there are no collections in museums, and regarding 90s, there are no permanent collections in Croatia, it's so sensitive that it have not merited yet a collection. We actually also develop virtual museums. We have one related to one site of execution, Dotrščina in Zagreb. So it's that we work very much locally also to make sure that places of remembrance in our town are eventually visible and respected. And this museum is related very much, the virtual resistant museums, it's something what we'll just start recording for Croatia, Hungary, Germany and Poland, in hope to extend it further, because we believe it's very important now to record memories of people who have participated in resistance during Second World War, during socialist period, and whole their lives. So that eventually, in the long run, we have a material, a didactic material, or material somewhere prepared for use in museum collections, which would eventually show that there are people who found a way to oppose different authoritarian and totalitarian regimes. Yeah. So we also use our recorded interviews in documentary films. On study visits, we organize study visits to places of remembrance in Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Serbia. We cannot go further because of lack of funds. And it is that when we produce the films related to that study visits, it's very important that there are actually testimonials of survivors themselves. Currently, we work on development of theater project with some theaters in Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Serbia, in which the inserts from interviews might have a place, because it's related to detention centers and prisons, but this is still in a beginning stage, so for several years I guess you'll not hear anything because it will not be yet produced. And we prepare exhibition on fate of refugees, which we hope to be launched in Zagreb in 2016. That's rather cheap, so we are quite convinced that this is going to happen, in cooperation with curator from Museum of Ethnology from Zagreb. And we are part of preparation on exhibition on crimes of Nazis and their collaborators in the Balkans. And here we cooperate with Topography of Terror from Berlin. This will be their exhibition, but we hope to bring it then in Croatia. It is very difficult to open topic of collaboration of Ustaše regime or Chetniks or other collaborators in post-Yugoslav countries. This is still a very closed issue. And we find this cooperation with institutions in other European countries very promising in that direction. And we really want to strengthen international networking between institutions who work on promotion of resistance, because we find that these experiences of affirming nonviolence, solidarity, eventually enable people to link easier. You know, sometimes they really find it difficult to get through this wall of silence around survivors. We commonly experience this wall of silence around survivors, not just when encountering survivors personally, but also when listening to their recollections. So sometimes it's easier to connect with experience of opposing regime and violence. And it is that I'll mention that we are part of large regional coalition which is promoting Regional Truth Commission. We don't find actually way to use the oral history work in that, but it's important that you know that there is this effort to establish regional commission on establishing facts on crimes, victims and perpetrators, and there have been some political moves towards establishing, and the case is not lost, so it's still promising. And in general, we find very promising advocating right to truth, justice and remembrance. The establishment of special rapporteur on the right to truth, justice, reparations and guarantee of non-reoccurrence was quite important day for us, and we hope to welcome him not just in Croatia but in wider region next year. So is that I also would like to mention that currently we plan in cooperation with SENS agency, which recently have opened documentation center in Srebrenica. You don't see it on PowerPoint because we are not sure will we use oral history inserts in that documentation center, because we currently plan center in Vukovar. We still have no money on horizon, but you first need to have idea, and then later you maybe find some funds, because the first phase of this center should be related to proceedings at International Criminal Tribunal for War Crimes in former Yugoslavia. So we are not sure will in second phase, where we will present criminal proceedings at courts in Croatia and Serbia, will there be a place for memories? You know, there is always question, and here I want to open some dilemmas. When you present oral history collection, you really need to make distinction between forensic truth, factographical truth, and a narration as such. So it's that the narrators do not necessarily remember all details, and it's that mixing in presentation, you know, the legal proceedings aimed at factography and narration, it's maybe not the most promising way. But these are dilemmas which we'll deal with in cooperation with museums with which we cooperate with. So it's that one thing which I would like to say about our context is that it's very difficult, even now when our collection is published, and now I just want to access the web page.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's okay.
So I would like to show, this is our main web page of Documenta, which you mostly see things in Croatian. But you see also photo from Vukovar today, as I mentioned, it's Remembrance Day on Vukovar. But I'll bring you in a second on the oral history web page. On our main web page, we actually publish all our ongoing comments on dealing with the past process in Croatia. So it includes things related to functioning of judiciary institutions and oral history. But the page which is most interesting for you is Croatian Memories, which is actually a page where you can also see this 10 minutes long film, which I will not broadcast now because we have no time. But please visit. As you see, there are interviews. In these 10 minutes, we try to present a span of collection. We try to present that it goes on from 1920s on, some characteristic inserts from interviews. And it is easy to search. You see that there are actually a glossary, chronology, and you always have, with interview, I'll just show if a web page will respond. It's always difficult to count on that. So it's that, I will not show the full interview, but it is that you always have a short story. What happened to the person when she, Marija Lovrić, was born. So it's that her husband was killed in crimes against civilians in Osijek. She's from mixed marriage. You see it will start immediately. I just wanted to show you the structure. So it's that when you want to search, you can then jump to whatever you're interested for, because this is a longer interview, which is also interesting because Marija Lovrić was able to experience. So you see it's undertitled. Okay. Will not have time for it. Sorry. Sorry for disturbing Marija. I just wanted to jump on the third web page. We use quite some web pages that has advantages and disadvantages, I frankly tell you. This is a web page which is related to advocating rights of civilian victims, of survivors who still have no access to reparation. So it's that, as in many other countries, reparations are linked, unfortunately, with the legal proceedings. So it's only the ones who have proven in the court of law that particular war crime was committed could hope for some kind of reparation. We advocate that eventually civilian victims should get acknowledgement and recognition also through different forms of reparations. And this is part of a campaign in which we eventually, in average, have one event per month in a different towns. This month will be in Zadar. And it is that in these public events, we eventually combine the faces of our campaign. People whom you see here have also given us interviews. But what is important here is one of the rare places where you see survivors of different nationalities together. So it's that it is a message as such that wherever you have found yourself, either you are a victim of grenades or bullets, of bullets fired by either Croatian army or Serbian units, as a civilian victim, you have a right to truth, justice, and reparation. So it's that then on events, some survivors usually speak, and we show insert from the recorded interviews of some other survivors. So I just wanted to make you aware that this is also a possibility, but we are still finding ways, and I'm afraid that on the end, I have to say that our web page in average per year has more than 100,000 visits, but not so much in the part which is related to personal memories. So it's that actually people are more interested in legal proceedings, not so much on fate of survivors. And it is sometimes that when I feel a bit melancholic, I wonder, will our society start to listen to these actually silenced voices? Putting the collection online was far from enough. We'll have to think about years to come about more and more creative ways to present it. And it is that I hope that they'll start to listen, but perhaps some will not. So it's that we have completed public opinion research on dealing with the past in 2006 about how actually different sectors of society approach dealing with the past process, what they think about trials, what they think about reparations, what they think about acknowledging suffering of people on different sides of wars. And what came out is that in a different segments, more than 60%, 61% of people have been for processing war crimes, disregarding of which ethnicity have been victims and which ethnicity have been perpetrators. But when it came to individual trials, this support was lower than 60%. And it is that we hope to carry out this research again in 2016 to see where as society we stand just now. Thank you very much.